Part 32. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 311. There was a lot of noise in the restaurant, and it was already dark. The Suzhou city outside the window was a little darker, with only the Xianlong street still brightly lit. The third floor is all private rooms, there are not many guests, and the corridor is empty. Su Buling walked slowly to the door with a folding fan in hand, raised his hand and knocked on the door. Dong dong. Who? The woman's light voice sounded from inside the house, a bit wary. Miss Zhongli, we say goodbye to each other in the capital. We haven't contacted you in half a year. Do you still remember me? Dong dong dong. The sound of boots stepping on the floor sounded, and they moved behind the door. Then the door opened, revealing Zhongli's beautiful figure with a red veil on his face, his hair wrapped in a scarf, and his figure was covered by a wide robe. All he could see was that he was tall. Tall, with long eyelashes, and a pair of green eyes full of energy, with a bit of confusion at this time. Su Daxia? How do you know I'm here? Su Buling raised his hand and saluted with a calm expression. I don't deserve to be called a hero. Miss Zhongli helped me a lot in Chang'an. I didn't thank you. I just saw her at the window and came to the door without permission. Please don't blame her. Zhongli Chuchu glanced up and down, then turned sideways to get out of the way. How could that be? It's a great honor. Mr. Su, please come in. Su Buling nodded slightly and entered the room with a folding fan in hand. He glanced at the room where he must be temporarily staying. The room was very neatly tidied, with incense burning and a hint of powder smelling from the woman's body. It was sober, elegant, and quite alluring. It's just poisonous, cartilage scented. Su Buling was perplexed and patted the folding fan in his hand. After thinking about it, he just regarded it as a means of self-defense when his daughter was away from home. He didn't care and sat down on the small couch by the window. Zhongli Chuchu looked left and right in the corridor. When there was no one around, he closed the door and walked towards the small couch with graceful steps. Zhongli Chuchu has been trained by her master since she was a child. She is learning how to show off a woman's beauty almost all the time. In order to be sure of victory in front of Ning Qingyi's man, Zhongli Chuchu is very serious. In the Renai Hall, I would like to thank Mr. Su for saving me. If it hadn't been for Mr. Su's help, the little girl would have. As Zhongli Chuchu spoke, he walked slowly and untied the white gauze skirt covering his body, revealing the close-fitting red skirt underneath. Strictly speaking, it is not called a skirt. It is a costume from the western region. The upper body is red and decorated with pearls. A small waistcoat, exposing both arms and navel, the lower part of the neck is completely white, and underneath is a red diagonal skirt, which reaches 3 inches above the knees, covered with white flowers. Su Buling narrowed his eyes slightly. Although he had seen a lot of swimsuits and the like in his previous life, after all, this is not the modern era. After coming here, he saw many women like Aunt Lu who were covered tightly from neck to toes. Suddenly he saw such a person, indeed a bit unexpected. But it's just a bit unexpected. The weather in the northwest is hot, and there are many girls dressed up like this. Zhongli Chuchu has a good figure, which makes her look a little different. Zhongli Chuchu was very satisfied with Su Buling's gaze. She walked slowly to the small couch and sat on the opposite side of the tea table. She made a graceful and elegant posture. She raised her hand and slowly took off the veil hanging by her ears with a 3-pointed look in her eyes. Shy and soft, it can be said that it fully demonstrates a woman's advantages. Su Buling rubbed the jade fracture fan, looked at Zhongli Chuchu, and said in a calm tone, "The girl from Renai Hall helped first. It's right to help, no need to thank her." He. Zhongli Chuchu's eyebrows were curved, and he took off the veil on his face, revealing a cheek that was very characteristic of the western regions, a high nose bridge, snow-white skin, red lips like fire, and a pair of green eyes. He looked more and more beautiful like Ning Yuhi. The appearance is completely different. The first adjective that comes to mind is gorgeous. It is a bit aggressive and gorgeous, as if it is attractive, making it difficult not to look at those eyes. After Zhongli Chuchu took off the veil, his eyes fell on Su Buling's eyes, waiting for the surprise, infatuation, astonishment, and restraint in the man's eyes. Zhongli Chuchu had seen this kind of look too many times before. No matter how cold, arrogant, or noble the men were, after seeing her, they all became like shameless dogs. They were so attentive and flattering that she would be greatly affected if she smiled. Encouraging, just. Su Buling's eyes were pure and flawless, and after taking a look, the girl is so beautiful, no wonder she can be friends with King Yi. A simple compliment without any evil thoughts. Zhongli Chuchu was stunned. This reaction was wrong. After thinking about it, she slightly raised her lips with a charming smile, and then untied the red gauze covering her hair. Instead of combing her long black hair into a bun, she braided several small braids and draped them over her head with flower ropes as decorations. On the back, it is impeccably beautiful. The unique dress and appearance also show a somewhat different temperament. She is like a wild horse on the grassland, but she has the softness of a Central Plains woman in her bones. I am afraid that as long as it is a man, it will be difficult to change her for the first time. Open your eyes. Seeing that Zhongli was so neatly dressed, Su Buling turned his head and looked at her in confusion. Is it hot in the house? Zhongli Chuchu sat sideways opposite the small case, stared at Su Buling for a moment, then lowered his head and looked down, his brows gradually frowning. It's for convenience to dress up in disguise when you travel around the world. Naturally, you can no longer be secretive when meeting your friends. As he spoke, Zhongli Chuchu kept looking at Su Buling's eyes. He didn't look the least bit surprised when he saw the other person and his behavior. He secretly gritted his teeth and deliberately straightened his chest, and shook the string of bells on his waist to make a ding bell sound. Sound softly. Naturally, Su Buling misunderstood this kind of coquettishness. He picked up the teacup and took a sip, feeling a little confused. Well, the girl has done me a favor. Strictly speaking, I owe you a life. The 12 states in the Northwest are all mine. If you have any needs, just tell me directly. You and King Yi are friends. There is no need, well, there is no need to mobilize so many people. Zhongli Chuchu frowned and looked at Su Buling carefully. No matter how she looked at him, he was as calm as a mountain, and her heart gradually panicked. She heard Ning Qingyi say that Su Buling was very attentive to Ning Qingyi when he saw her, and he followed Ning Qingyi everywhere. Today, she wanted to see how unbearable Ning Qingyi's man would become after seeing her beauty. How could he not react at all? If he didn't react, wouldn't it mean that she was not as good as Ning Qingyi? Thinking of this, Zhongli Chuchu naturally showed dissatisfaction and frustration in her heart. Although she didn't like her master, she was still confident in herself. It doesn't matter if her master didn't compete with Ning Yuhi back then, how could she not even be better than Ning Qingyi? Let's not talk about how her master would react after knowing this. She herself couldn't accept it. Could it be that the Su was blind? This shouldn't be the case. Zhongli Chuchu was thinking about it, and after hesitating for a moment, she stood up again. There is no such thing as helping or not helping between friends. Well, I am also a friend of Master Su. I learned a dance outside the Great Wall a few days ago. Do you want to see it? Are we familiar with each other? Su Buling stroked his folding fan. He really didn't expect to encounter such a situation. He couldn't say he didn't want to see it since the other party had spoken. He nodded immediately. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 312. Jingle jingle jingle. Soon, Zhongli Chuchu walked to the center of the room and danced in a Western-style dance. Her limbs were slender, her waist was flexible, her waist bells rang softly, her every move and smile was full of moving aura, and her every move was charming, without any traces of it. I haven't been able to practice it for many years, so I definitely didn't just learn it. Su Buling's head was filled with questions. He admired it carefully for a moment and felt that the girl was showing great attentiveness. He just stared blankly at something wrong. He patted his palms with a folding fan and commented softly in the style of a talented scholar from Chang'an. There is a beautiful woman in the north, peerless and independent. Once she looks at the city of King Gren, then she looks at the country of King Gren. The voice of the folding fan he holds is quite magnetic, his eyebrows are cold, and his peach blossom eyes contain a bit of a smile, which is indescribably alluring. So handsome. Zhongli Chuchu was stunned for a moment. He almost danced wrongly. He felt something was wrong for a moment, so he stopped hurriedly and stood there with a frown on his face. What's going on? This stinky man knows so much magic. Seeing that Zhongli Chuchu was no longer jumping, Su Buling also stopped and joked. Miss Zhongli, you are so polite when we first meet. I am really flattered by you. There is still cartilage incense in the room. If it weren't for the great kindness, I would have thought that the girl was planning something evil against me. Zhongli's pure white cheeks turned red for a moment, then returned to normal in an instant. He gritted his teeth and sat down opposite Xiaoan with some reluctance. It's just to prevent Xiao, not against the young master. Since the young master has noticed the smell of cartilage, why do you still come in? Su Buring chuckled lightly. The cartilage incense can make people's limbs weak, and they can only use half of their 100% strength. With the girl's skills, you can't do anything to me if you are hit by the cartilage incense. Really? Zhongli Chuchu was a little unconvinced. He placed his hand under the small case and calmly curled his fingers, and a silver needle shot out and shot toward Su Buling from under the table. Su Buling casually spread the jade fracture fan and slapped away the silent silver needle, his voice a little more serious. Girl, please be kind. If you need help, just say so. If you continue to behave like this, your friendship will be ruined. Zhongli Chuchu took a breath. He was a little helpless to the son of a prince who refused to accept softness. He couldn't play with fire anymore. He nodded slightly. I heard that the young master returned to Suzhou, so I have been waiting for the young master here. I really have something to ask for. Su Buling sat upright opposite Xiaoan, picked up the teapot and poured a cup of tea. But it doesn't matter. Zhongli thought about it for a while, but he couldn't say, please drool and stare at me with amazement, and forget about Ning Qingyi, so he could only become serious at the moment. Well, I have been traveling around the world in the past 2 years, and I heard a piece of news in the world. Hundreds of years ago, when the former Qi dynasty was founded, there was a very powerful man. The army is like a powerful dragon entering the river, and the martial arts are superb. Su Buling chuckled lightly. The god of killing Zhou Jixian, the founding general of Deqi, was awarded the title of national master after the founding of the country, and has been passed down from generation to generation. The current northern Qi national master Zhou Qingkaiu is his 12th generation direct descendant, very powerful figure. Zhongli nodded. Chuchu, I heard that the imperial master rode on a dragon after achieving his feats, leaving behind a Tongtian treasure book, which can make him invulnerable and ascend to the heavens. Su Buling raised his fan. It's just a folk legend. After Zhou Jia achieved great success, he returned to the mountains and forests and became a hermit in Zhongnan Mountain. There is still a tomb of the god of war on Zhongnan Mountain. My grandfather even went there to worship once after he conquered Chang'an. The Song family admires his unparalleled military skills and protects him well, but he does not become an immortal. Zhongli Chuchu naturally didn't know as much about the historical secrets of these dynasties as the princes of the feudal dynasty, so he couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. Is it possible that the Tongtian treasure book is fake? Regarding this question, Su Buletinling hesitated for a moment. He could come to this world and repay 1,000 in return. No one could say for sure that something messy would happen. I don't believe in the theory of ghosts and gods. The idea of becoming an immortal must be fake. However, Zhou is indeed a sage of a generation. History books also record that he left 3 volumes of books. One volume is about the art of war. It is still a compulsory subject for general disciples. Lesson. One volume is about the art of emperors. It was not found when they broke into Chang'an. It may have been taken to the grassland by the remnants of the northern Qi dynasty. There is also another volume. It is said that it is Mr. Zhou's lifelong martial arts experience. It combines the best of hundreds of schools to form its own section. Really, it is indeed the supreme treasure that Jianghu people dream of, but it is a pity that it has never been confirmed. Zhongli Chuchu nodded lightly, picked up the teacup and took a sip. The last volume should be the Tongtian treasure book. When I was walking in the Central Plains, many people were inquiring about this news, including many famous people in the world. Su Buling had never paid attention to such irrelevant gossip. He shook his head and said, I don't have the Tongtian treasure book. There are quite a lot of magic weapons and martial arts secret books. If you want it, girl, I can let you pick a few. Zhongli Chuchu's dream since he was a child is to be as skilled as his master and no longer have to worry about being in danger. But there are people who are better than others in the world. If you don't become the strongest, there will always be a day when you are suppressed by others. She thought about it. There is no second in martial arts. If you want to learn, you must learn from the best. It is said in the Jianghu that Zhou left 4 jade articles. After collecting them, there will be clues to the Tongtian Baidian. I inquired for a long time and learned that this is the western region. There is a piece called Ice Flower Hibiscus Pendant. The young master is the young master of Ziliang. Have you heard of it? There were mountains of jade in Prince Su's palace, so Su Buling naturally remembered this. If it's a jade pendant, I have to go back and ask to find out. Zhongli Chuchu let out an "oh," then pursed his lips and smiled. Young master, I don't need to do anything, just tell me if you have news, and I will find a way to get it myself. Let's talk about it when there is news. Su Buletinling was able to unlock the dragon lock gu, all relying on the detoxification method provided by Zhongli Chuchu. It was true that he owed a favor, but he didn't have much to say. After sitting for a while, he put down the teacup. The visitor is a guest. If Miss Chuchu doesn't mind, she can stay in the palace first. Zhongli Chuchu stood up. I don't dare to trouble the young master, I can just live here. Su Buling didn't say much, raised his hand and saluted, and then walked out of the room. The room fell silent. After Zhongli Chuchu waited for the sound of Su Buling's footsteps to disappear, his green eyes gradually showed a bit of irritation. He looked down at his dress, then walked to the bronze mirror and inspected it carefully. After making sure that there were no flaws, he inserted the small Yao muttered. Damn it, how could Ningqingyi be prettier than me? Could it be that he likes something colder? Thinking of this, Zhongli Chuchu suddenly realized that his performance today was too proactive. The son of a high-ranking prince like Su Buling must have seen many beauties who took the initiative, but he was even more impressed by the cold and indifferent chivalrous women. Interested, it seems that the method is wrong, next time I have to be cooler. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Gongzi. Chapter 313. Thanks to you Yet Fan for being the leader. Thank you to Bai Ge Liaoluan for being the leader. Currently in dead, 116/448. In the backyard of the palace, it was already dark and sparsely populated, and the maids and nannies had all gone to bed. The lights were off in the boudoir in the courtyard, and Madame Lu and Xiao Xiang'er lay back on the pillows, silent but with their eyes open. After returning from the sea of flowers outside the city, Madame Lu went out to relax, but she couldn't get rid of the messy thoughts in her mind. She always felt a little guilty about the trust of the Suwang and his wife. I didn't think so before, but now I realize that my behavior with Ling was a bit excessive, from rubbing her shoulders at first, to rubbing her legs, and then rubbing her when he was drunk, carrying her on his back, and kissing her face a few times on the carriage back to Suzhou. This doesn't look like an elder and a younger person being together, but for some reason, I didn't feel anything wrong at the time, but now that I think about it, I feel like Ling is boiling a frog in warm water, slowly bullying her. How is it possible? Ling's eyes clearly don't have any evil thoughts, she's just concerned. Ms. Lu pursed her lips, she was already tossing and turning, and the more she thought about it, the more she couldn't sleep. Behind her, Xiao Xiang'er was facing the outside, and she was also thinking about it. I don't know what went wrong today, she actually told Su Buling, I'm still a little interested in you, which doesn't mean she admits that she likes him. Xiao Xiang'er dares to love and hate, it's better if she doesn't say it, but after she says it, she can't deceive herself and make excuses anymore. But she swore to the ancestors of the Xiao family at that time. One cannot break one's promise. What if the ancestors really blamed her? Just after saving Su Buling, a thunder struck him to death. Su Buling did help the Xiao family in Chang'an. The ancestors might not blame her, but this matter was a disgrace to the family after all. My sister would definitely not be able to explain it. What does it mean to die without wanting to die? Ah! Two sighs sounded in the room at the same time, and then fell silent again. Hongluan, you haven't slept yet. I can't sleep, why haven't you slept either? I couldn't sleep at night, was I worried about Su Buling? No. By the way, where did Ling go? Humph went to a brothel in the city. I heard from the maid that Yang Zunyi's son hosted the party and found 10 brothel girls in the city to accompany him to see who was better. Ms. Lu's face darkened slightly, and she turned upside down, raised her hand and slapped Xiao Xiang'er on the buttocks. Why didn't you stop him? He hasn't come back yet so late. If Ling is deceived by those unclean women. Xiao Xiang'er shuddered after being hit, and turned back with anger in her eyes. Why hit me? I'm not his aunt. He went to the brothel to drink and befriend prostitutes. What does it have to do with me? Ms. Lu wanted to get up and run to the brothel to pull Su Buling back, but after thinking about it, she felt that Su Buling would not be interested in the women in the brothel. He was probably just drinking. After a little hesitation, she lay down again, supported her upper body with her arms, and looked at Xiao Xiang'er's profile. Xiang'er, how can you say it has nothing to do with you? Didn't you help Ling detoxify? Yes, how is it? Women should keep themselves clean, and so should men. Think about it. If Ling is deceived by those unclean women and comes back to you to detoxify, she just kissed someone else and came to kiss you again. You dash. Xiao Xiang'er had goosebumps all over her body, turned around and pushed Madame Lu. What are you thinking about? I have nothing to do with him. If he really wants to detoxify, he has to detoxify in any case. Anyway, I will commit suicide after detoxifying, no matter what. Madame Lu and Xiao Xiang'er were lying face to face. Seeing that she was in a bad mood, she thought about it and sighed. Xiang'er, I thought about it carefully today. Although it is detoxification, it is done, you finally got out of the palace, it's not worth it to die again. Ling is around without a woman, some things are really hard for me as an aunt to handle. Xiao Xiang'er was stunned and glanced at Madame Lu. Why? Didn't you think yesterday that I would find a good husband to marry after the poison was removed? Today, you changed your mind. Ms. Lu frowned slightly, you are my only sister, and it's for your own good. I know you don't like Ling Er, but most women can only see what their husbands look like when they get married. You have already had your wedding night, how can you cut off your relationship after the poison is removed? Xiao Xianger thought about it and turned away. I know you are doing this for my own good, but I feel guilty about this. My surname is Xiao, and I can't do anything to let my family down. Alas, you saved Ling Er out of righteousness, and you didn't let anyone down. Ling Er also helped the Xiao family, so you are worthy of it. I have already left Chang'an. Come out, live here under an assumed name, no one will blame you. After listening for a moment, Xiao Xianger said in confusion, Hongluan, what happened to you today? Why did you suddenly match me with Su Buling? Do you want to take advantage of me as my aunt? Mrs. Lu raised her hand and clapped again, dissatisfied. I treat you as a sister, so I tell you these things. If it were other vixens, humph, anyway, I treat you as a sister, I can't watch you die. Ling Er has grown up and is a person who values friendship. If I were to do something heartless because of my dilemma, I would feel even more uncomfortable. You have done everything, I can't really let you marry an outsider. Xiao Xianger frowned slightly, looked back, and saw that there was no jealousy or sarcasm in Mrs. Lu's eyes, and she was really concerned. She was stunned for a moment. After a short silence, she whispered. Alas, don't worry about it. What I say is what it is. It will take a long time to detoxify. Let's talk about it after the detoxification, and you are not much different from me. Don't call me aunt all day long. Su Buling, you can do it yourself. Mrs. Lu obviously didn't understand. She lay on the pillow and pondered for a while, and said softly. By the way, Prince Su heard that Ling Er and I had returned home and rushed back in advance. It is estimated that he will arrive in 2 days. When the time comes, I will tell Prince Su to select the prince's consort. When the wedding comes, you can sneak in with him. You have to have a wedding when you marry in, otherwise you will be treated unfairly. When Xiao Xianger heard this, her hands tightened slightly around the quilt. She wanted to continue to say I will never marry after the detoxification, but when the words came to her lips, they became. Prince Su has never seen me, so he should not know me, right? I guess he doesn't know me. Just pretend to be my maid. I will tell Ling Er tomorrow. Why? Can't you say that I am your maid in the capital? Sisters. You are my sister, you are 1 generation older than Ling Er, how can you marry? You have no brains. Who will the crown prince choose as his wife? Do you have other plans? Hearing this, Mrs. Lu showed some worry between her eyebrows. Ling Er is so good and powerful, there are few women in the world who are worthy of the position of the main wife. I think there is no suitable one. It depends on Ling Er herself. Anyway, I can't be the one with this status. Well, didn't you say that he was close to the daughter of Song Jiju? Miss Song is pretty and looks like a good child. She has a good temper, but she is not suitable to be the main wife because she comes from a poor family. It is difficult to convince people. Alas, Ling Er likes Miss Song very much. I shouldn't have been so lenient in the past when I was in the capital. Why don't you remarry? Anyway, you like to be a housekeeper. Pht, what nonsense. Hongluan, Ling Er is so fierce. Bah, are you crazy? There was constant whispering in the room. Su Buling stood outside the window, wanting to call the baby out, but after listening for a while, he decided not to disturb her. After arranging the search for the jade pendant, he returned to his room with a warm heart. I didn't sleep yesterday and I didn't have the energy. I only wrote 3 chapters in 1 day. I have to adjust my state. I'm really sorry. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 314. 3 days and 3 nights. Su Buling discussed the matter of Jiangnan seriously with Xiao Xiang'er in the room. He appealed to her emotions and reasoned with her. He almost wore out his lips. The small mahogany sign turned into 8 positives. He finally convinced the unyielding baby. He reluctantly agreed to go to Jiangnan to propose marriage. The main purpose was to take her home to make amends. Xiang'er stopped making trouble, so Prince Su and Aunt Lu naturally said nothing. Anyway, they were going to try. Proposing marriage was not an engagement. It didn't matter if Miss Xiao declined. She just regarded it as accompanying Aunt Lu and Xiang'er to visit relatives. Suzhou City is 4,000 miles away from Jinling in a straight line. It is impossible to go in a straight line by boat. It is more than 10,000 miles round trip. Even if you travel 100 miles a day, it will take 3 months just on the road. It will take more than a year to return. Therefore, it is not possible to leave at any time. It takes a lot of time to prepare before leaving. You have to bring the betrothal gifts and other things. If Miss Xiao agrees, then she can load them directly on the boat and bring them back to get married. If Miss Xiao does not marry, it is also convenient to load them directly on the boat if she meets a suitable person on the way. In addition, Xiang'er and Aunt Lu have been staying in the boudoir all year round. They yearn for poetry and distant places. The itinerary on the road must be planned well. Watching the autumn moon on the Yellow Crane Tower and taking a boat together on the West Lake can also be regarded as fulfilling Aunt Lu and Xiang'er's dream. After the matter was finalized, Su Buling became busy, circling and dotting on the Dayo map in the study, thinking. I have to go to Wudane Mountain to capture Master and Manzi. I heard that Chen Daizai is good at swordsmanship, so I have to visit him. Chen Chong in Beijiang doesn't seem to be on the way. I can meet Xuechenzi from Liuhuman. Old Xiao stood opposite the desk with a cane, muttering. There are many beauties in Chu, especially in Jingzhou. I'm afraid I can't get to Chengdu, I must go to Hangzhou. Su Buling looked at the red circles all over the map and shook his head. Forget about the beauties, otherwise it will take me 100,000 miles to go around this circle. Old Xiao chuckled, what's wrong with 100,000 miles? Going out to the rivers and lakes for a few years and seeing all the mountains and rivers is not bad. Once you inherit the throne, you will have no chance to leave again. What the prince regrets now is that he didn't go out to the rivers and lakes with the princess back then. Su Buling thought for a while, father is in good health, so it doesn't matter if he goes out for a while. But Aunt Lu and Xiang'er may not be able to bear it, so it's better to go early and come back early depending on the situation. While speaking, a guard came to the door and said loudly. Young prince, the messenger sent a letter, and it was written on it that the young prince wrote it personally. Su Buling put down the brush and asked the guard to bring the letter in. After a quick look, he recognized that it was written by Song Yufu. Last time, Song Yufu's letter was too important, so I burned it after reading it, and never replied. It was a bit impolite to say. Su Buling looked at the doll still leaning on the desk, shook his head and chuckled, leaned back on the armchair alone, opened the envelope with a paper knife, unfolded the paper and checked. The first sentence was. Su Shizi, I'm writing to you, why didn't you reply to me? Su Buling raised his eyebrows, said sorry secretly, and continued to read. I didn't want to write to you, anyway you didn't reply. However, my grandfather heard that you returned to Suzhou, and asked me to tell you that I would come to Yuelu Mountain when I have time, so I reluctantly wrote you another letter. I heard that the prince became Zhao Hongyaimei, this can't be blamed on me, I just asked Uncle Su to draw a picture for me to keep, so as not to forget what you look like and can't recognize you when I come here in the future. Well, there's nothing else to do. The village is so boring. My father bought me a maid, who is silly and knows how to work all day. As for me, I still take a group of children to study in the school in the morning, and I stay in the village entrance to enjoy the cool at other times. Grandpa has a dog called Ah Huang, who is very cowardly. He also has a big white goose, the one I mentioned last time. I call it White Prince. It chases and bites a few hens all day long, scaring the hens so much that they stop laying eggs. It is as unreasonable as the prince. Every time I see it, I think of the prince, and I can see the big white goose from morning to night, so. Okay, remember to come early. My grandpa is very powerful. If you don't come, I will never write to you again. Song Yufu. The letter ends here. Su Buling raised his eyebrows. He didn't expect Song Yufu to be so passionate when talking about love. He felt warm in his heart. After thinking for a while, Su Buling spread out a piece of rice paper, brewed a little, and wrote. Miss Song, look behind you. Then he folded the paper, put it in an envelope and put it in his arms. After all, he will soon go into the world of martial arts in white clothes and swordsmanship, and the first stop is probably Yuelu Mountain. But before leaving Suzhou, Su Buling still had to repay a favor. So the next morning, he took the long spear Shuolong from the ancestral hall, rode on the snow, and came to the Langxiang Pavilion on Xianlong Street. In Langxiang Pavilion, Zhongli Chuchu had been living in the wing room on the third floor, waiting for Su Buling to come again, and then show her charm to make Su Buling fascinated, so as to report to her master. It's a pity that Su Buling has never come to visit since the brief contact that night. The news of the ice flower hibiscus pendant was just what Zhongli Chuchu heard from the martial arts world, and she just said it casually as an excuse, and she didn't expect Su Buling to find the rumored thing. But he ignored it after agreeing, which still made Zhongli Chuchu a little annoyed. It's okay to ignore her appearance, and he didn't even care about asking for information. If he doesn't treat her as a beauty, he should at least treat her as a guest, right? This is simply not treating her as a human being. Zhongli was so angry that he wanted to go to the palace to ask, but he had no identity if he went there openly, and he was looking for death if he went secretly, so he could only wait in the side room, and he had to pay attention to his appearance at all times. In the wing room at this time, Zhongli was dressed in white as snow, with no makeup on his cheeks, giving him a somewhat otherworldly look. Although her appearance is too gorgeous and not as cool as Nanking Yi's, and her temperament is a bit inconsistent, she still looks like one of the most stunning women in the world. Zhongli Chuchu sat in front of the dressing table, carefully paying attention to her bun and clothes, just like a girl waiting for a guest to come to her door. After sitting like this for more than 10 days, there was finally a sound outside the door. Dong dong. Miss Zhongli. Zhongli Chuchu immediately cheered up. After carefully looking at her clothes to make sure they were all right, she stood up with graceful steps, pretending to be lukewarm, and raised her hand to open the door. Master Su. The voice was cold, neither far nor near, with a hint of immortality. Outside the door, Su Buling was dressed in a white robe, with a nothing sign hanging around his waist, and his hair tied up with a hairband. He was simple and energetic, just like a knight walking on the rivers and lakes. Seeing Zhongli's elegant dress, Su Buling was stunned for a moment. If it weren't for those green eyes, he would have thought he had recognized the wrong person. He lowered his head and looked at himself. Miss Zhongli, why are you wearing couple's clothes with me? Zhongli Chuchu looked down, her face suddenly turned a little red, but she calmly suppressed it, still looking lukewarm. Master, please respect yourself. With a hint of dissatisfaction and annoyance, it smelled a lot like Nanking Yi. Su Buling blinked, a little confused, and didn't understand why Zhongli Chuchu's style had changed so much. However, what people like to wear is their business. He didn't say much, so he just said softly. I have news about the jade pendant that the girl asked about. It's quite far away. I'll take you there to get it. Zhongli Chuchu said obviously a little surprised, but he immediately returned to his cold fairy appearance and nodded slowly. You've got a job, sir. Su Buling had nothing to say, so he turned around and walked out of the restaurant. Zhongli Chuchu stood at the door and saw that Su Buling didn't look surprised at all. He couldn't help but feel a little anxious and said, "Master, what do you think of my outfit? Do you want to change your clothes?" Su Buling turned around and looked up and down. "It's better than before. It's not suitable for you. It doesn't look as good as King Yi." Bang! The door slammed shut. "What are you looking at?" Followed by rustling. Su Buling frowned slightly, spread his hands and pondered for a while, but still pretended not to hear. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 315. The morning light just sprinkled on the endless yellow sand on the east side of Suzhou City, and horses and camels galloped out of the city gate. Su Buling rode the snow-white horse Zhufengtugjiu, whose hair was black and shiny. A weapon was hung on the hook on the side of the horse. It was longer than the ordinary white wax pole spear and was wrapped in waterproof black cloth. Zhong Lishuchu changed back to the red gauze skirt, wrapped her hair with a headscarf, sat sideways on the white camel, and paid attention to her appearance. Her figure and temperament attracted many passers-by to look at her. After seeing the eyes of those stinky men, Zhong Lishuchu finally felt relieved. Su Buling ignored her these days, and she even suspected that she had become ugly. Now it seems that she has not changed. Su Buling must be a blockhead, so he did not react at all. Zhong Lishuchu looked at Su Buling walking in front of her, thinking that he was going to a manor outside the city to find a jade pendant, and did not take it seriously. She was thinking about how to attract the attention of this blockhead. The two of them rode their mounts and galloped outside the city, and soon approached the edge of the desert. There were fewer and fewer pedestrians around. Zhong Lishuchu thought for a long time, and suddenly an idea came to her. She sat on the camel and began to hum the tune of the western regions. Hum. The tune was gentle and moving, just like a clear spring suddenly appeared in the deserted desert. The red gauze on her body fluttered gently with the never-ending wind and sand, and her green eyes were a bit lazy and saw through the world. She was beautiful and had the taste of an exotic beauty. After such a hard effort, the wooden man in front finally responded. Su Buling turned his head and smiled, but did not disturb him. After all, it was a rare enjoyment to hear such a song in the desert. The outline of Suzhou City gradually disappeared, and the sand sea on all sides was endless. The scorching sun in the sky rose to the sky and fell from the sky, turning into a red sun at the end of the sand sea. Zhongli Chuchu hummed dryly for a whole day. The wooden man in front never turned his head again. His voice was almost hoarse. He was thirsty and hungry. He gradually became annoyed and stopped humming to look around. "Where are you taking me?" "To find the jade pendant. There is a ruin ahead. Camp there for a night and continue on the road tomorrow?" Zhongli Chuchu was puzzled. This was her first time in Suzhou since she could remember. She didn't know where this deserted place was. She was a little wary at the moment. "He wouldn't want to sell me." Thinking of this, Zhongli Chuchu felt that she was overthinking. A son of a vassal, he would go so far to sell a girl. Is he bored? Could he take me to the wilderness? That's impossible. He is so powerful and has such good martial arts. No one would dare to say anything if he killed me in Suzhou City. There is no need for him to come here. Zhongli Chuchu has her own life-saving tricks when she travels in the world. After she felt that Su Buling had no reason to attack her, she dispelled her vigilance and asked, "Where is the jade pendant? How far is it?" Su Buling calculated, "A few 100 miles, it will take about 3 or 4 days to walk." Zhongli Chuchu couldn't tell which was which, so she didn't say anything more. She followed Su Buling and walked another 2 miles to a small green area in the desert. There was a small lake between the green areas, and next to it were old houses. No one lived in them and they were dilapidated. Several sections of the low wall collapsed. It should be a small village. Zhongli Chuchu got off the camel at the lakeside, let the white camel eat grass and drink water, took the water bag and walked to the entrance of the small village, but saw dozens of skulls piled up outside, most of which were buried by yellow sand. There were also many corpses at the entrance, all of which were broken limbs and remains, and none of them were complete. Having traveled around the world for many years, I must have seen corpses, but this scene of bones all over the ground can only be seen in the frontier fortress where there have been many years of war. Zhongli Chuchu frowned, feeling a little creepy. She walked around a pile of skulls and looked inside. We stay here tonight? There won't be ghosts in the wilderness, right? Su Buling took the bag from the wind-chasing horse, walked into the dilapidated village with ease, and joked. With me here, ghosts dare not come. If Miss Zhongli is afraid, just live with me. Zhongli Chuchu narrowed her eyes slightly, but saw that Su Buling's expression was calm and his eyes were straight. He was not teasing her. After thinking for a while, he followed him into the village and said softly. Okay. Su Buling paused, confused. He couldn't hear such obvious teasing. Seeing that Zhongli Chuchu seemed to trust him very much, Su Buling didn't want to say too much. He sat down in a mud house that could only block the wind with the package, took out a blanket from the package and spread it on the ground, and gathered the broken wood from the collapsed beams together, lit it with flint, and started a bonfire. It was getting dark. Su Buling took out the dry food he brought with him and handed a portion to Zhongli Chuchu. You are a girl, wandering around the world alone. You are not wary of men. You are quite brave. Zhongli Chuchu sat sideways on the blanket, took the dry food, and chuckled. Young master is a good person. I believe you. Su Buling took a sip of the wine gourd. If you believed me, you wouldn't hide the hidden arrows in your boots and point them at me all the time. You also hid a lot of poison needles on your waist and even tied a few poison needles in your hair. Aren't you afraid of stabbing yourself? Zhongli Chuchu's face froze and she retracted her foot a little. I am used to wandering around the world. Young master, don't misunderstand, but how do you know so clearly? Using poison is the lowest form of martial arts. There are basically no colorless and odorless poisons in the world, especially highly toxic ones. People with high martial arts skills must have keen senses. You can smell the type of poison from a few feet away. Even if there is no poison, from the smell, the sleeve arrows and silver needles cannot hurt the master at all, and the poisonous smoke inside has little effect. Unless it is an extremely overbearing and strange poison like locking dragon goo, it will not hurt anyone. Zhongli Chuchu didn't believe it. After a little hesitation, he still didn't dare to test it. He just chuckled and said, there are many ways to use poison. Some young masters can't even imagine it. It just depends on how ruthless the person who uses poison is. Anyway, if someone has ill intentions towards me, no matter how high my martial arts skills are, I will be sure to escape unscathed. Su Buletinling was dubious and had no comment. There was only the night wind in the desert, and there was no sound, making it look a bit eerie. Zhongli Chuchu sat for a moment, looked at the bones in the village, and asked curiously. Where is this place? Why are there so many bones? If they were left behind in a war, someone should collect the bodies. Su Buling glanced at it. I came here when I was 16. I got lost and ran here to ask for directions. It turned out that the horse was too good and was surrounded. Only then did I realize that it was the den of horse bandits. Zhongli Chuchu had heard about the power of desert horse bandits and frowned. Then, how did you escape? Su Buring raised his finger and pointed at the small jingguan at the entrance of the village. After killing the people, I slept here for one night and escaped on horseback the next day. Zhongli Chuchu looked slightly stunned, tilting his head to look at the village that looked like it had been destroyed by war. Did you do this alone? Didn't you hear what Mr. Shu said? Storytellers love to exaggerate. I can't believe it, I also heard that you like to bully women, especially married women. Is it true? Su Buling blinked. Well, this is nonsense. I heard King Yi say that the girl came from South Vietnam, but she looks like someone from the western region. Why did she travel so far? It's nothing. When I was a child, I was born in a small tribe outside the Great Wall. I met bandits and was sold to South Vietnam. Fortunately, I met a master, and that's where I am now. Su Buling nodded. Your honorable master can find a way to crack the dragon locking goo. I think he is also a master. If you have the opportunity, I must recommend him to one or two. When Zhongli Chuchu heard this, he smiled faintly, did not answer, took a piece of wood from the corner and put it under the blanket, then lay down with his back on his back. I fell asleep. Su Buring smiled, didn't interrupt anymore, and closed his eyes to meditate beside the campfire. In the yellow sand of the desert, there is not a single person in a radius of dozens of miles. There is only a man and a woman in the dilapidated small village. The woman is still very weak, and something will happen no matter how you look at it. Zhongli Chuchu closed her eyes and pretended to be asleep, but she was actually a little tangled in her heart. Not only was she afraid that Su Buletinling would be a beast in disguise and would mess with her, but she was also afraid that Su Buletinling would be worse than a beast and not mess with her. If she messed up, she would be able to escape unharmed even if she couldn't beat Su Buling, but the wealth she had accumulated over the years would definitely be gone. But if he doesn't act recklessly, doesn't it mean he has no idea about her at all? Result: this guy is really a piece of wood. Could it be that she had to run to the lake and take a wild bath to remember that she was a woman? Zhongli Shuchu's heart was full of annoyance and frustration. She gritted her teeth and still didn't dare to take a wild bath. She became increasingly curious about how Ning Qingyi's charming girl could attract such a humble gentleman. How is she worse than Ning Qingyi? The more I think about it, the angrier I get. Zhongli frowned and waited till midnight. Unable to bear it anymore, he raised his hand and rubbed his arm, whispering, "Son, it's a bit cold." Soon, a robe was draped around her body, bringing with it some residual warmth. Zhongli Chuchu blinked his eyes and looked back. The handsome young man in white clothes was still sitting by the bonfire with his eyes closed. Under the firelight, his face was really beautiful, just like a jade-faced monk with his hair covered in practice. Thank you to the Avada love locking spell boss for the 10,000 reward. Just in case, I have adjusted the status in the past 2 days. The updates are fast and slow and unstable. It should be fine in a few days. Dear bosses, please cast a monthly vote and a recommendation vote. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 316. The Black City between thousands of miles of yellow sand is the northern hub of the Western Region Commercial Road. It is far opposite to Suzhou City and has similar geographical environment and functions. The two countries built these two large cities in the northwest wilderness near the Western Region. In addition to expanding their territory, the main reason was to ensure the smooth flow of trade routes. Whoever lost them would basically lose control of the various tribes in the Western Region. It is easier to enter the customs from Shazhou and Guazhou, and the richness of the Central Plains spreads far and wide. Most business travelers still go from Suzhou City, and only about 30% of people enter northern Qi from Haikan. However, during the autumn harvest season, even if there were only 30% of the caravans, it was still a huge number based on the scale of the two countries. On the commercial road outside the Black City, the end of the caravan and camel caravan could not be seen at a glance. There were caravans setting up tents and camping on the spot along the way. The cavalry of the Northern Qi dynasty patrolled along the way to ensure the safety of the caravans and carefully maintained this road. A vital lifeline. In the early autumn night, merchants gathered in the Black City, because northern Qi was driven out of the central plains. At first glance, except that the men all had disheveled hair, it was actually no different from Suzhou City. The architectural layout of Prince Zhou's residence in the center of the Black City is directly in the Jiangnan style, with white walls and green tiles, verandas and pavilions, and a strong sense of homesickness everywhere. On the branches above the moon, the lights in the dark city are brightly lit, like a bright pearl in the sea of sand. Cars and horses gathered on the street outside Prince Zhou's residence. Countless generals and squires came to the door with gift boxes. Even northern Qi state sent envoys to celebrate Prince Zhou Zhongnu's 48th birthday. 12 years are a cycle, and 48 years old is considered a longevity in this world. At this time, guests gathered in the palace, maids and servants were walking back and forth, and guards were patrolling the outside. In a courtyard where the guests of the outer house lived, several people were sitting in the tea house. Among them was a young man with a long sword on his back. He had a feminine appearance and long hair shawl. It was Zhou Yizi who was fighting with Su Buling in the Tai Chi Palace. The last time Chang'an City was beaten to the ground by the sick Su Buling, for Zhou Yizi, who had never suffered a defeat since childhood, it was not an exaggeration to describe it as humiliating. But the strong always know their shame and then act bravely. Zhou Yizi didn't feel any resentment in his heart, he only remembered the 10-year agreement. 10 years later he would get back what he had thrown away with his own hands. After returning to the northern Qi dynasty, Zhou Yizi entered the wilderness without any support. He fought with tigers, wolves, and horse bandits for food like an ascetic monk, forcing himself to become stronger little by little. Originally, this experience was going to last for a year, but today, Prince Zhou's birthday, the northern Qi capital sent envoys over, so he had to come back and show his face. There were 4 cups of tea in the tea house. Opposite Zhou Yizi was a Jianghu man, wearing a Taoist robe and also carrying a long sword wrapped in black cloth. Zhou Yizi has been to the Central Plains and has some knowledge of the various schools in the Central Plains. The Taoist priest named Wu Yu opposite him does not look like a real Taoist disciple, but rather like a fortune teller who travels around the world pretending to be a magician. However, he was a guest coming to the palace to visit, so Zhou Yizi naturally didn't want to ask too many questions. "Mr. Chen, I leave this matter to you." After a while, the closed door next to the tea house opened, and the 2 people walked out of the room. Zhou Yizi raised his eyes and saw that walking in front was Chen Xian, the first counselor under Prince Zhou. Because he was replaced by King Su a few days ago, Chen Xian's mental state was not very good, but victory and defeat were common matters for military strategists. Although Zhang Fu scolded Chen Xian, he did not really punish him. His current status is still very aloof. Next to Chen Xian was a middle-aged scribe with a long sword hanging from his waist. He had an aquiline nose and a majestic look. He could barely hear his breathing when he walked. Just by looking at his appearance, Zhou Yizi knew that he was a master with the power of a master in the world. Zhou Yizi had never heard of this person who was reported to be a constant swordsman. There must be top-secret matters coming from Zhongyuan to visit Prince Zhou, so naturally it was not easy for him to ask. After Chen Xian walked out of the room, he sat down next to Zhou Yizi and raised his hand. "Brother Chang, please sit down. I will report this matter to Prince Zhou later. However, the jade pendant is a family heirloom of the prince. I can't guarantee whether it will be successful or not." Chang Shijian sat down next to Wu Yu, a wild Taoist, with a gentle smile. "This move is mutually beneficial. As long as Mr. Chen is willing to put in a good word, His Royal Highness Prince Zhou will definitely agree. In addition, I have one more thing that I would like to discuss with Mr. Zhou." Zhou Yizi could see that Chang Shijian was an ordinary man, and he believed in the strong are respected, so he nodded politely and said, "Senior, just say it." Chang Shijian chuckled and turned his head to look at Wu Yu next to him. "This is a friend I made this year. I once competed with Chen Daizai, one of the top 10 warriors in Wuodang. Chen Daizai chased him for 300 miles but couldn't catch up. I can't say his killing power. This Jing Gong is probably only King Su's goalkeeper can match him. Zhou Yize nodded slightly. Anyone who could be worthy of the title of Wu Kuei, except for the one from the Tang family, was a ruthless person. His resume was indeed impressive. Chang Shijian chuckled lightly and continued, the reputation of Zhou Qingkaiu, the Northern Qi imperial master, is known to everyone in the world. He currently has 2 apprentices, and the young master is one of them. According to the inheritance of the imperial master lineage, I should also take on another apprentice. When Zhou Yizi heard this, he sat up a little straighter. It's true. Senior brother and I can only be regarded as outstanding people, not geniuses. Master and he have been worried about this matter. I originally had a few candidates in mind, but it's a pity that either others got there first, or they couldn't accept them. After searching for many years, we still can't. I haven't found a suitable one yet. Could there be someone recommended by the seniors? Chang Shijian smiled, this friend of mine has a niece. I originally planned to teach it myself, but found out that I couldn't teach it, so I asked around and found me. I looked around and found that learning swordsmanship was really a waste of resources, so I went to find Xuechenzi. I never thought that Xuechenzi had taught me for a few days, but I was too embarrassed to accept it and asked my friend to look for him again. I happened to be visiting Northern Qi, so I stopped by to see if Mr. Zhou was willing to teach him. Chen Xian is a counselor and has no martial arts skills. He was a little confused when he heard this, it's just teaching an apprentice. Do you need to mobilize troops like this? You don't even dare to teach Daio's newly promoted Wu Kuei. Zhou Yize looked a little serious and said softly, it's not that I don't dare to teach, but I'm afraid that I won't be able to teach well. It's a priceless jade, but it was carved by a craftsman with poor skills. If he cuts it incorrectly, it will damage the embryo. But the Liuhe Gate, there are so many peaches and plums in the world, even Xuechenzi has no confidence, and there are probably not many people in the world who can teach him. Is he really that powerful? Chang Shijian nodded lightly, I may have misjudged Xuechenzi. Senior said so, I will lead the way, I just hope not to disappoint my master. During the chat, a follower ran over from outside the tea house. Your Majesty is here, please take your seats. Chen Xian nodded, got up and took the guests from afar to the main hall of the palace. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 317. Jingle. Jingle. Camel bells and horse bells jingled together, and the gates of the Black City were wide open. It had just fallen into the night, and in the evening, businessmen were entering the city, almost filling the wide gates. Tens of thousands of troops were stationed around the Black City, and soldiers were also gathered on top of the city. However, in order not to scare the merchants coming in and out, there were not many soldiers and horses in the city. On a sand dune on the west side of the Black City, camels and horses were lined up, and 2 figures looked into the distance. The distance of 600 miles is still a bit far. After 4 consecutive days of trekking through the deserted Gobi Desert and the Sand Sea, we finally arrived near the Black City. Su Buling breathed a sigh of relief and took off the long stick wrapped in cloth from the side of the horse. Next to her, Zhongli Chuchu was holding the camel, with an undisguised look of exhaustion on her face, and a hint of complaint. Su Buling said he would take her to get the jade pendant, but he didn't tell her in advance that he would go so far. She was not prepared at all. She set off with a water bag, but she walked for 4 days. Everything she could see was covered with sand. If she hadn't been able to distinguish the north, south, east, and west, she would have thought she was lost and was going in circles. No food, no water, no bathing. On the first day, Zhongli Chuchu was still thinking of ways to seduce Su Buling. After discovering that Su Buling was a piece of wood, she temporarily gave up her thoughts and followed them silently. Sometimes she was thirsty and embarrassed to say it, so she had to be gentle. Cough twice to remind. If she had known earlier, she would not have followed him out. It was not worthwhile to go so far just for the jade pendant she heard about. Seeing the outline of the city again, Zhongli Chuchu finally breathed a sigh of relief and looked around. Is this Shachan? Su Buling shook his head. Black City. The Black City is also your territory. Zhongli Chuchu thought about it for a moment, feeling a little confused. I seem to remember that Heikan belongs to Northern Qi, and you are the crown prince of Su. Su Buling held up the long spear and said softly, I'm looking for a jade pendant for you. The jade pendant is in Heikan, so I came here. Zhongli Chuchu blinked his eyes, his face immediately became alert, and he looked around. Master Su, you are too bold. You are alone in the enemy's territory. If you are discovered, we will be dead. Su Buling turned around and walked towards the city wall, casually saying, let's sneak in, get the jade pendant and then leave. What are you afraid of as a Jianghu person? Zhongli and Chuchu thought about it. She was originally homeless and had no place in the world. Su Buling's martial arts skills are so high. As long as he doesn't reveal his identity and just goes to get the jade pendant, there shouldn't be any problems. If there is a problem, he can run away. Thinking of this, Zhongli Chuchu didn't say anything more. He tied the camel and horse here beside a dry bush outside the city, and then quickly followed Su Buling to the foot of the city wall on the west side of the Black City. Although the Black City is crowded with soldiers and armor, it is impossible for the city walls to be full of people at all times without a war. Su Buling waited for a moment under the city wall. After confirming that the patrolling Northern Qi officers and soldiers had passed by, Su Buling stood up from the ground and took a few long steps directly up to the 3-foot 6-foot city wall. After Zhongli Chuchu waited for Su Buling to explore the way, he pulled out a dagger from his waist and climbed up the city wall quickly. His movements were quite agile. The two people entered the market in Black City. The number of pedestrians around them suddenly increased, and the noise became louder. Zhongli's Chuchu dress is very common here, and she didn't attract the attention of passers-by when she walked among the crowd. However, all the men in the Northern Qi dynasty wore their hair down, so Su Buling found a bamboo hat and put it on his head, and carried his long hair to a restaurant near Prince Zhou's mansion. There are many business travelers in the restaurant, and most of them carry weapons when they go out. At this time, they are talking about, Your Majesty is celebrating his birthday today. I heard that His Majesty sent an envoy to celebrate his birthday. Qi Kuahe from the Royal Boxing Hall also followed, and He Lian is also here. Su Buling found an empty wine table by the window, leaned his long arm against the wall, and listened quietly to the conversations of the people in the restaurant. Being in a foreign country, Zhongli Chuchu was still a little dazed. She sat in the corner with her back to everyone and untied her veil. She took a big sip from the teacup and then breathed a sigh of relief. Who are these people? A figure from the Northern Qi dynasty, Qi Kuahe is known as the top 3 swordsmen in the Northern Qi dynasty. When he was young, he went to the Central Plains and sparred with the old sword master Zhu Silk Mountain. What's the result? Su Buling chuckled lightly. The result is definitely a loss, but I hope the old sword master can take over. I guess he is also a figure. He Lian is a retainer of Prince Yu, bordering Taiyuan and Yuzhu. It is said that he is close to Chenchong. There was a fight, but I don't know the outcome. Zhongli nodded. He had been eating dry food that tasted like chewing wax for several days. Naturally, he was a little tired of it. After the waiter served the food, he picked up the chopsticks, thought about it, and poured another bowl of wine for Su Buling. Let's eat. Su Buling picked up the wine bowl and took a sip, then stood up. You eat first, and I'll get the jade pendant. Zhongli Chuchu was supposed to follow, but she was really tired from walking these past few days and finally sat down to have a good meal. Naturally, she didn't want to be in such a hurry, so she blinked her eyes and said, "We've already sneaked into the city, don't be in a hurry. For now, let's look for it tomorrow. Soon, right over there." With a smile on his face, Su Buling picked up Chang Shan, turned around and walked out of the restaurant. He also bought a roast chicken from a roast chicken stall on the street, wrapped in oil paper and carried it in his hand. Zhongli Chuchu stood at the window holding a bowl of white rice and watched, with a somewhat inexplicable look in his green eyes. "We have been together day and night for 4 days, which is normally enough to see a person clearly, especially a man and a woman alone. If there is even a hint of evil thoughts towards her, there will always be some clues. But in the past few days, Zhongli Chuchu only felt that it was plain, calm, not far away, not close. He would cover her with clothes when she was cold, stop to rest when she was tired, and sleep very close to each other at night, but he would not touch her. This feeling is very strange, it is definitely not intentional to her, nor is it annoying. She has no relatives or friends since she was a child, but she still feels that this is like the feeling between close relatives and confidants, without any purpose or desire, caring when it is necessary, and at other times it is plain as water, without any behavior or words to prove it. Thinking of this, Zhongli Chuchu suddenly felt a little embarrassed. After all, her original intention was to make Su Buling's true colors exposed and become like other disgusting men. At present, it seems that she has judged others by her own standards. Su Buling is indeed different from other men. He is a modest gentleman, gentle as jade, and never anxious or slow at any time. Zhongli Chuchu was lost in thought when she suddenly saw the gentle white-clothed gentleman, holding a spear in his right hand and a roast chicken in his left hand, walking to the heavily guarded gate of the Zhou mansion. No, no, no. Zhongli Chuchu was dumbfounded, and then she was so scared that her soul flew away. She almost dropped the bowl and ran out in a hurry, thinking, it's over, this guy is really a blockhead, how can he sneak in like this? Isn't this a suicide? Unfortunately, before she could stop him, she saw that the outside of the palace in the distance was already silent. Everyone looked at Su Buling, who was holding a roast chicken, all with shock and disbelief. Zhongli Chuchu froze on the spot for a while. She was afraid of getting into trouble and running away alone, which was too unrighteous. She could only stand at the window of the restaurant and watch carefully. "Sister, your things fell." Just when Zhongli Chuchu was tense, a little girl's voice suddenly came from behind, and her skirt was pulled down. Zhongli Chuchu turned around and saw a little girl standing behind her. She was wearing a small skirt that was more common in Jiangnan, with a small pouch hanging around her waist and pigtails. Her two big eyes were watery and quite spiritual. She was looking up at him, holding the gauze scarf she had just untied when eating. "Wow, sister is so beautiful." "Oh, thank you." Zhongli Chuchu forced a smile and raised her hand to take the thin red gauze. "The prince is very fierce." Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 318. There were many guests in the palace, and all the famous people in the territory under the jurisdiction of Prince Zhou sent people to send congratulatory gifts. Chen Xian brought Zhou Yizi and 2 guests from afar to the side hall of the palace. Chang Shijian and Wu Yu were from Jianghu, so naturally they were not qualified to drink in the same hall as a prince. They just sat with many squires and minor officials. Chen Xian and Zhou Yizi entered the main hall directly and took their seats behind the desk at the front. At this time, the splendid main hall was brightly lit, with more than a dozen tables arranged in 2 rows, and those sitting there were all dignitaries from the northern Qi dynasty and several generals from the Left Root army. Prince Zhouzhan was sitting above. He had sworn not to remove his armor until Suzhou was destroyed. At this time, he was still wearing golden armor, with his long hair hanging down. He looked quite heroic, like a veteran on the battlefield. In the middle of the hall, the envoy sent by the northern Qi monarch was reading a congratulatory message written by the emperor. Qi Kuahe and He Jian, two warriors with some status, sat at the table at the back. Qi Kuahe was in his early 40s and was the head coach of the imperial boxing gym of the northern Qi dynasty. He was in his prime and could not be considered one of the top masters in the capital of the northern Qi dynasty. When he saw Zhou Yizi approaching, he said, "Yizi, why did you come here?" Qi Kuahe and Zhou Qingkai were of the same generation, they were considered elders, and they had given Zhou Yizi some guidance. Zhou Yizi's attitude was more respectful and he nodded slightly. Just now, Mr. Chen and Mr. Chen went to meet two Jianghu people. They said they had a good idea that master should take a look at, so they went over to have a chat. He Lian was extremely tall and fond of martial arts. Hearing these words, he turned his head. The threshold for the disciples of the imperial master is not very high. Among the younger generation in northern Qi, your senior brother is the only one who is more talented than Mr. Zhou. Counting those in the Central Plains, there is only one Mike student and one Su Buling. Is it possible? Is that good young man better than Mr. Zhou? Zhou Yizi smiled calmly, the world is so big that there should be many strange people. Chang'an and his party made me understand what the sky is high and the sky is high. Qi Kuahe laughed twice. It's a good idea to have this intention, but people who practice martial arts should have a sense of arrogance. Mei Kushan and Su Buling are only famous among the young people in the Central Plains. Ye Zi is already an outstanding person, and now maybe there is a gap, and you will catch up after a few years of hard work. Zhou Yizi thought about it for a moment. Su Buling, can't be considered a human being. The dragon-locking poison is so severe that it makes people palpitate. I heard from spies that the antidote for locking the dragon was recently found from the western regions. It's hard to imagine how powerful it can be once it's solved. He Jian shook his head. No matter how famous you are still a human being. Mr. Zhou has never been out of the world, and he met Su Buling in the first battle. It is normal to be impressed by him. When you see more geniuses in the world in the future, you will find that he is actually just a human being. That way. While he was talking, a guard suddenly hurried in from outside the hall. Because the special envoy from the capital was reading the monarch's congratulatory message, and the guests were talking in whispers, so he barged in so rashly, which was obviously a breach of etiquette. For a moment, the special envoy stopped talking while holding the imperial edict. Prince Zhou also frowned and said, "Why is it in such a hurry? Did Su Yu call over?" He. There were several chuckles in the hall, and everyone's eyes turned to the guards who suddenly broke in. The guard looked panicked, stepped forward and bowed. "Your Majesty, there is a guest outside who claims to be Prince Su's crown Prince Su Buling. He is here to congratulate your Majesty on his birthday." The guests were a little baffled. Even Zhou Yizi and Chen Xian frowned. Their first reaction was that someone was showing off and cheating on the banquet. However, in order to deceive, you should also give the name of a big family nearby. King Su is quite close, but he is a king with a different surname from an enemy country, and they have been opposed to each other for a long time. Is it possible that there are still people who have not heard of it? Zhang Ru tilted his head slightly and was stunned for a moment before he made sure he heard correctly and said in a deep voice, "Come in and report any mess. Su Yaneng will send his son to celebrate my birthday. I will cut off the head and use it as a chamber pot." The tone was filled with anger. The guard trembled in fright and said tremblingly, "I thought I was just trying to fish in troubled waters, but, just..." Before he finished speaking, there was noise outside the hall. So people turned around to look, and saw in the small square outside the hall, a young man dressed in white like snow walked around the screen wall, holding a roast chicken in his left hand, and a long stick wrapped in black cloth in his right hand, and strode towards the main hall. Dozens of diners and soldiers armed with weapons tried their best to stop and scold them. Unfortunately, no matter how skilled they were easily slapped down at close range, as if they were in a deserted place. There were hundreds of guests around the main hall. When they saw someone making trouble, they all stood up from behind the desk. Chang Shijian in the side hall frowned. He had never seen Su Buling before and didn't recognize him. Seeing that Prince Zhou's guard was so careless, he thought of getting up to help clean up as a favor, but Wu Yu next to him suddenly held down his hand. Off his shoulders. Chang Shijian turned his head and saw Wu Yu's eyes filled with bloodshot eyes, staring at the figure in white, gritting his teeth and saying, "Be calm and don't be impatient. This person is Su Buling, and he is by no means an ordinary person." Chang Shijian was slightly startled when he heard this. After taking a closer look, he sat down again. "Bold. Who are you?" There were constant scoldings outside the main hall, and the guests of the palace gathered around from all directions. Su Buling carried the long stems and roasted chicken, slapped away the fish blocking the way, and came to the front of the main hall. After seeing the armored man sitting in the deepest part, he said, "I heard that Prince Zhou is celebrating his birthday today, and I came here to congratulate you. Unexpectedly, I was attacked with swords. Northern Qi is a country of etiquette after all. Is this how you treat guests?" The voice was clear and unhurried, but it reached the ears of everyone in the surrounding hall. "Should you order it?" Zhou Yuzu reacted when he heard the sound, and his face immediately showed shock and disbelief. Qi Kuahe and He Lian frowned. They heard that the man's martial arts skills were unfathomable, but they still didn't believe that King Su's son dared to run here. Chen Xian's expression changed drastically and he stood up. Could it be that the Ziliang army broke the city? "Come on, go outside the city and have a look." Zhang Aryu was equally unbelievable, but compared to the Ziliang cavalry breaking through the Black City silently, the possibility of Prince Su running over was more likely. After all, Su Buling had been preparing to do this a few years ago, but he just left the border. Then he got lost and ran away to kill a group of horse bandits. In 2 sentences, Su Buling had already entered the main hall. The guests of the royal palace were guarding Zhang Nu with weapons in their hands. Qi Kuahe and He Lian also stood up. Zhang Aryu took a look at Su Buling, because he had seen Su Yu on the battlefield before, and then he really confirmed that the person coming was the son of King Su, and said, "Prince Su is so courageous, he dares to do this." Su Buring carried the roasted chicken and walked to the center of the hall as if there was no one else around. He raised his eyebrows slightly and looked at Zhang Nu above. The middle door is wide open, welcoming guests from all directions. Why don't I dare to come? Chen Xian saw Su Buling. After analyzing the situation for a while, his expression became excited and he said, "Get him quickly, he is the son of King Su." Wait. Before many of the guards took action, Zhang Aryu raised his hand. "Su Buletin Ling, Su Yu wants you to surrender." Everyone was stunned when they heard this, and then felt that it was very possible to send their own sons here. There seemed to be no other possibility except surrender. But King Su had just broken through Wangnan Pass, and now the 2 armies were still fighting in Yuanzhou. They had always taken advantage of victory to pursue, so it was unbelievable to surrender while taking advantage of victory. Facing the confused looks of everyone present, Su Buling put the roast chicken on the table with a bright smile. "Prince Zhou may not be worthy enough to ask my Su family to surrender. Come here to celebrate your birthday and discuss something with Prince Zhou." When Zhang Aryu heard this, he was not angry at all. He raised his hand and asked the guest to put away his sword first. "I would like to honor you, old general. I'll give you face and say what you have to say. Although the 2 armies are fighting without killing the envoy, if you don't have a suitable excuse today and want to return to Daio, Su you may have to spend 2 days to return to Daio state to change." Su Buling held a long spear wrapped in black cloth at an angle and glanced at everyone present. We broke through Wangnan Pass a few days ago. The Qi army defended Yuanzhou. The two armies were in a stalemate in Yuanzhou. The war caused many merchants to dare not travel. So my father asked me to come over and talk to Prince Zhou. Zhang, are you frowned? Are you here to ask for peace? Su Buling smiled. Prince Zhou thinks so, and the two sides have ceased fighting. General Tu will no longer attack Yuanzhou. Northern Qi will use Jingyuan as the boundary and allocate the territory south of Jingyuan to me, Daiyue. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 319. Pa. Before Su Buling finished speaking, all the officials present stood up, and the special envoys from the capital also glared at him. Zhang Niu's face darkened slightly. Are you asking me to cede land to seek peace? Su Buling spread out his left hand. The south of Jingyuan is already in the hands of my father. You can't take it down, let alone take back Wangnan Pass. You and I have withdrawn half of our troops to fight in Yuanzhou, and the daily loss is no different from bleeding. If Prince Zhou thinks that he can wear down Daiyue, he can continue to fight. I just want to bring a message. It's up to you whether you agree or not. After the voice fell, there was a slight silence in the hall. In fact, Chen Xian and other councillors can also see the current situation. Prince Su broke through Wangnan Pass, and 80,000 Western Liang troops and more than 100,000 Daiyue Western troops were piled up in Yuanzhou. The northern Qi side was also constantly sending troops to reinforce from other places. It would be impossible to break Yuanzhou without a few years, and it would be even more difficult to take back Wangnan Pass. Both sides were in a situation where it was difficult to make any progress. When the war breaks out, the daily consumption of food, soldiers, military pay, etc. is astronomical, and it depends on who can't afford it first. After years of recuperation, Northern Qi finally accumulated some wealth. It is obviously at a disadvantage to fight a war of attrition with the vast central plains. It is estimated that in the end, either the war will expand and they will burn their boats directly, or they will cease fire with the actual control of the territory as the boundary. Northern Qi lacks confidence, and Daiyue is cleaning up its internal affairs. It is not appropriate to start a full-scale war at this time. Jingyuan has changed hands, and the two sides are still fighting just for a breath. Zhang Ni was silent for a moment, and his voice was flat. I will consider this matter myself. Do you have anything else to say? Su Buling chuckled. There is also a private matter. I heard that Prince Zhou has a ice flower hibiscus pendant. I owe a favor to someone. I came to get it. I hope Prince Zhou can give it to me. Everyone in the hall frowned slightly, and Chang Shijian, who was watching outside the hall, had a gloomy face. Zhang Ni chuckled when he heard this, raised his hand and took off a crystal jade pendant from his waist, held it in his palm and looked at it. The jade pendant is an item passed down from my ancestors. There have been some messy rumors in recent years. Many people want this jade pendant. You came to my house alone to get the jade pendant. Even if I give it to you, how can you take it away? Around the hall, more than a dozen guests, Qi Kuahe and He Jian all took a breath and were ready to go. Su Buling glanced around, holding the long spear, and slowly untied the rope wrapped in black cloth. Prince Zhou and my father have been in opposition in the northwest for decades. Even if they are enemies, my Su family will not fail to give them the face they deserve. Today is Prince Zhou's birthday banquet. I came to congratulate you and have a polite chat with you. I don't want to see blood on this happy day. The black cloth fell apart, revealing a snow-white long spear with a dragon pattern that spread to the sky. The spear tip was 2 feet long and as bright as a silver blade. Su Buling held the spear in one hand, with the spear tip pointing diagonally to the ground, and looked up at Zhang Nu. But if the prince doesn't know how to show respect, don't blame my Su family for being rude. Puff. The guests present all sneered, as if they were looking at a fool. Chi Kuahe and He Jian stared at the dragon-patterned long spear, their eyes unable to hide their amazement. Zhang Niu looked at the long spear in Su Buling's hand and sat up a little straighter. Shui Longyin, 60 years ago, Su Lai broke into the capital of our great Qi and took this national treasure from the hands of our great Qi monarch. Even this king has only heard of it. I thought it would be hard to see it again in this life. You kid, this gift is quite heavy. Su Buling narrowed his eyes slightly. Give it or not? Zhang Niu raised his hand, with the jade pendant hanging on his fingertips. If you have the guts, come and get it. Bang. At this moment, the brightly lit hall was suddenly blew by a crosswind, the snow-white bricks on the ground exploded, and half of the candles were extinguished in an instant. Many guests saw that the man in white who was still standing quietly in the center of the hall just now disappeared in the blink of an eye, leaving only the cracked floor tiles on the ground. At the same time, Chi Kuahe and He Jian rose from the ground, drew out the swords and the imperial golden swords at their waists, and attacked Su Buling who was already in mid-air. Crack, crack, crack. The sound of swords being drawn came one after another, and the sound of rebuke suddenly exploded in the hall. Ah! Su Buling held a long spear in both hands, and drew a crescent moon in the air. In a flash of silver light, he had swept over Chi Kuahe who rushed up first. Chi Kuahe's swordsmanship ranked among the top 3 in northern Qi, and the sword in his hand was also a rare famous weapon in the world. He came to Su Buling like a hawk, and wanted to display his lifelong learning, but after a flash of silver light in front of him, he found that the white-clothed figure had bypassed him and attacked He Jian behind him. Seeing Su Buling's back, Chi Kuahe's mind flashed a trace of joy of catching a flaw, and he immediately raised his hand and stabbed Su Buling's back with the sword. However, this sword that was stabbed out instinctively after practicing martial arts for a lifetime, the action was there, but the tip of the sword in his hand was not seen. Chi Kuahe's eyes showed some doubts, and only then did he realize that the hall was spinning and upside down. In the field of vision, half a person fell from the sky, wearing a gorgeous robe, but his right shoulder to left waist was cut open, the upper body was gone, and the sword was still in his right hand. The muscles instinctively made a forward thrust, and blood just gushed out. This half-person seemed to be me. Chi Kuahe's last thought in his life was this incomprehensible doubt and shock. How could someone be so fast that he didn't even have palpitations? How could he die like this? Yezi, I was right, this was indeed not a human, this was a monster. Swish. The cloud-patterned long spear was tumbling rapidly in the hall like a swimming dragon, and the extremely sharp spear tip cut off the weapon and the body without making any sound, just like a silver light passing through the body. He Jian was a step slower and had already noticed this eye-rolling scene. He quickly turned the scimitar in his hand into a defensive position and blocked it in front of him. Unfortunately, there was no sense of force in his hand. What He Jian saw was the ghostly man in white, who stepped heavily on the pillars in the hall, turned around in the air and rushed towards the palace guests who were rushing towards him with swords. Looking down, a straight bloodline appeared on his chest, and his body began to dislocate from the bloodline. Ah! Plop! Bang! The faces of many guests turned from mocking to shock in an instant, and screams and surprises sounded at the same time as the sound of 4 bodies falling. Zhou suddenly froze in his seat, his right hand raised, but he had not yet grasped the sword he carried with him. His eyes almost bulged out of his eye sockets, staring at the white shadow that was difficult to catch up with. The azure purgatory-like scene in the hall actually gave Zhou a sense of déjà vu, vaguely remembering that when he was a child, he was chopping in the grass with a bamboo sword, just like this, swinging it casually, the grass leaves were split in two, and they were cut off neatly, exactly the same as the scene in front of him. But he was cutting grass, these were living people. Ah! Ah! Crackling. The hall was like being swept by a strong wind, blood and flesh flew everywhere, and the tables were torn into pieces, but the wind that swept was not clear. The attendant's sword outside the hall was originally holding the sword at his waist, but at this time he hurriedly let go, fearing that he would be affected. The wild Taoist Wu Yu was full of despair, as desperate as an ant standing under the sky. Ants can see the blue sky and white day, but how can a mere ant be seen by the sky? Kill. Ah! The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 320. In the restaurant next to the street, Zhongli Chuchu took the veiled red gauze from the little girl with braided horns, and continued to look out the window in a blink of an eye. Unfortunately, Su Buling had already disappeared through the gate of the palace. "Sister, your eyes are so beautiful." The little girl's voice came again, and she trotted to her side, turning her head to look sideways, her little face full of curiosity. Seeing that there was no direct fight, Zhongli Chuchu breathed a sigh of relief. He couldn't just run over and follow, so he could only stay in the restaurant and wait. Seeing the cute little girl standing on tiptoes to look at her, Zhongli smiled tenderly, sat on the stool again, and said softly, "The little sister is beautiful too." The little girl with braids pursed her lips. Seeing that she was not unhappy, she moved closer and looked at her carefully. There was a woman with the little girl. She was talking to the owner of the restaurant about the rent. She looked back and said with a smile, "Little Dehua, go upstairs and have a rest. Your uncle will come back later and see you being naughty, and he will talk to you again." "Mom, I'll go up in a moment, don't be in a hurry." Little Dehua giggled and looked curiously at Zhongli Chuchu's face. Zhongli carefully looked at the little girl's green and white skirt, and said softly, "Little Dehua, are you coming from other places?" Little Dehua said ran to Zhongli Chuchu and sat down. The stool was a little high. She supported the bench with her hands, and her embroidered shoe swayed and kicked the hem of her skirt. "You came from a place far, far away. Well, it's far away anyway. Where is your sister?" Zhongli Chuchu glanced out the window, then looked back, his eyebrows curved, and he thought for a moment. "It's definitely farther away than Little Peach Blossom." Xiao Dehua didn't believe it and asked curiously, "Sister is also a Jianghu person?" Zhongli Chuchu was stunned for a moment. "Yes, Xiao Dehua is so small, but she is also a Jianghu person?" "Follow the adults, right?" Little Dehua shook her head seriously. "Uncle said, I am also a Jianghu person now. I once met a big bad guy in a very big city, and my father died. Uncle said that when I grow up, I want revenge, so that's why you are a gangster." When Xiao Dehua said this, she was obviously a little unhappy, holding the small purse around her waist. Zhongli Chuchu frowned slightly when he heard this. Graves and grudges in the world are very common, but it is obviously wrong for such an innocent and cute little girl to be taught such things since she was a child. "Well, don't listen to your uncle. When you grow up, only those who want to be a charlatan will be a charlatan. If you don't want to be, then don't." Xiao Dehua smiled shyly, "I want to be a Jianghu person." "Huh," Zhongli Chuchu frowned, slightly confused, "want to avenge your father? You can wait until you grow up." Little Dehua shook her head, nodded again, glanced at her mother in the distance, then moved from the bench, took off the small purse from her waist, and untied it to reveal the silver ingot inside. "Dad loves me so much. I was killed by a bad guy. I must take revenge, but it's not just revenge. I met a very nice elder brother at my uncle's fortune-telling stall before. He asked me to tell my fortune. I said I didn't know how to do it. The fortune-telling was still done by me, and then I asked my eldest brother to come over the next day and ask my uncle to do the fortune-telling again. The eldest brother said that he would definitely come, and he agreed, but, in the end, I left. You couldn't find me when you came over the next day, and you must be angry because you took all the money. You have to return the money to him, and I'm sorry for giving it back to him. My uncle said that people in the world of Jianghu talk about grudges and grudges. Brother, don't blame me anymore. When Zhongli Chuchu heard these words, he didn't know what to say. He shook his head and chuckled. That big brother has known about Xiao Dehua for so long. Even if he is not a Jianghu person, he will not blame Xiao Dehua. He will definitely meet him in the future. Yes, little Dehua put away the silver ingot and hung it on her waist. She said with a smile, "Sister's eyes are so beautiful. My husband's eyes will definitely be very beautiful in the future, just like that big brother." 51 Aesthetic Beauty. Zhongli Chuchu pursed her lips and smiled, raised her hand to pinch the braid, thought for a while, and asked, "Has little Dehua started learning martial arts?" Little Dehua nodded, but was a little unhappy. "I wanted to learn, but my uncle stopped teaching me after a few days. Then I found another uncle who didn't teach me either. Finally, I met a grandpa who played with a big gun. Just like the buskers on the street, I really want to learn, but it's a pity that my grandpa taught me for a few days and stopped teaching." Zhongli shook his head and smiled softly. "Don't be discouraged. It is not easy to practice martial arts at your daughter's home, and it is very hard and tiring. Well, the girl should learn to be a nuhong, read, and it is best to find a good husband-in-law when she grows up." When Xiao Dehua heard this, she raised her little hand and scratched her hair. "Is it hard to learn martial arts?" Zhongli Chuchu nodded seriously. "It's hard work. I practiced in the winter for 3 months and in the summer. I walked on plum blossom poles every day. If I practiced too much, my face would get tanned, my legs would become thicker, and I wouldn't grow taller." Xiao Dehua stared at Zhongli Chuchu's very beautiful face and blinked. "Then my sister's martial arts must not be high, right?" Zhongli Chuchu tilted his head slightly and touched his face. Not sure whether he should be happy or unhappy, he nodded seriously. "Yes, my martial arts skills are not high." "Oh." Little Dehua thought about it carefully. "Actually, practicing martial arts is not that hard. Isn't there a villain book? Read it once, and then practice according to it, and your uncle will say you have learned it." Zhongli Chuchu didn't quite understand what he said, and just thought it was a child's talk. She knew from a young age that people are treacherous, and perhaps she was afraid that this lovely little girl would be harmed by the careless teachings of her elders. After turning her head to look at the smiling Xiao Dehua for a few times, she fumbled with the belt around her waist, took out a booklet, and stuffed it into Xiao Dehua. "This is a very powerful thing. Flip through it when you have nothing to do, and when you really become a martial artist in the future, follow the method above to equip yourself with some self-defense items, but be a good girl, don't kill people casually. Killing people will bring karma. Run away if you can, don't fight with others." Xiao Dehua was a little embarrassed holding the booklet. "What's your sister's name? When I grow up and can travel the world, I will go to find her." Zhongli Chuchu: "Well, I still have a little bit of reputation. You can ask around in the south and you should be able to find me. I seem to be going to the prairie, but I don't know where." While chatting, the woman finished chatting with the shopkeeper and turned back. "Xiao Dehua, go upstairs to rest." "Oh." Xiao Dehua jumped down from the bench, smiled at Zhongli Chuchu, and trotted to the stairs, waving before going upstairs. Zhongli Chuchu smiled with her eyebrows curved, and also raised her hand to wave. After watching the mother and daughter disappear at the stairs, Zhongli Chuchu sighed lightly. Just as she was about to sigh a few words of "when you are in the world, you can't help yourself," she suddenly found that the royal palace in the distance was surging with soldiers and armor. Hundreds of archers and crossbows rushed into the royal palace from all over, holding strong bows and crossbows. Many people had climbed onto the roof, full of murderous intent. His Zhongli Chuchu was so frightened that she got up and ran out of the restaurant.